some people have a view of our character and our human nature that says that there's sort of one type. You know, people are like this. And every time I hear that, it gets me itchy, because I think that reality of all of nature and all of the cosmos and human nature is built on dynamic tensions. So tensions between opposites. So that rather than having one type of, the idea that there would be one type of person is inherently unbalanced. You know, that reality is we have different kinds of humans, different kinds of people that are what makes society go. And it's the tension between opposing values that produces our common, agreed framework for living together. It's not, oh, we're all like this. You know, there's a tension between principles and archetypes.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernard Beitman, MD. I study meaningful coincidences and all their different variations and shapes. And one of the questions I've had about synchronicity is its relationship to archetypes. Just what are they? There's been a lot written, a lot of people telling us that these are the archetypes. Well, okay. It's a place to start, starting with just some basic patterns. And basic patterns is fundamental to the living here on Earth. I mean, patterns get repeated over and over again. It's part of the way we know things, by their repetition. Sun goes up, the sun goes down. You run patterns in your own life. Nature does its own thing and it repeats it. Pattern repetition is very common, and archetypes are a way of thinking about them that we'll get into today with our guest, Gary Bobroff, who's written a wonderful book called Knowledge in a Nutshell. It's about Carl Jung, and it's kind of making a guy who's written a lot of stuff into some clarity and some sense. And I recommend the book for you. And this is Gary. You're now looking right at him as I'm talking with you. And he's the founder of Jungian Online and Jung Archetypes. It's Archetypes and Academy, featuring personal growth live video courses. He completed a bachelor's degree in philosophy at the beautiful University of British Columbia. How many universities you get to look over the Pacific Ocean? You can do it there in Canada, in Vancouver. And he's got a master's degree in Jungian-oriented counseling psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. He speaks all over the world, gives seminars internationally, and is the author, again, I mentioned that book, the bestseller, Knowledge in a Nutshell. Gary, it's great to have you here and meet you after all these years.
Great to be with you. I'm so glad to be here, finally.
Finally it is. So tell us a coincidence story, a synchronicity story of yours.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's been quite a few in my life, luckily. Yeah, so I think so often our synchronicities are connected to the heart, and this is one of them that I'll talk about. So I was traveling a long time ago across Canada, and pulled over to get gas off the highway. And as I was coming back to the highway, I saw someone that I thought I recognized. And as I pulled up, it was her. And it turns out it was a ex-girlfriend. And she was traveling in the same direction in another car. So we sort of caravanned and she rode with me. And as we talked, we realized it had been 10 years to the day that we had been traveling in the same direction as a couple. And, to me, synchronicities, the thing people don't understand and they so often missed about synchronicities is the connection to the heart. It's the connection to feeling, emotion. Albertus Magnus, who was a teacher of St. Thomas Aquinas, said, 800 years ago, that emotion has the power to rearrange things and change things in the outer world, especially when we're really emotionally engaged with something. If you break up with someone, you run into them all over town, or that kind of stuff. So when there's a true heart connection, that's when synchronicities happen. I don't think that's an ego product. I don't think it's something we control at all. I think it's a function of real emotion. And so for me, that was echoing a heart connection from the past and honoring it. And I think so much of what synchronicities are doing are connected to the heart.
Indeed. And one of the most fertile places for synchronicity to take place is with romance. I mean, romance, how many people get started with some kind of synchronicity happening between the two of them, and they go, oh, it's meant to be. But unfortunately, even if you have them, sometimes you got to do something called working on the relationship. And I've had two women tell me they didn't work on the relationship because they had such a wonderful connection through synchronicity, and the relationships fell apart because you have to work on them. It's just coincidences tell you that you have an opportunity, but you still have to do something with them yourself.
Yeah, I think, in sort of like the language of maybe James Hillman or something like that, or, the Jungian school in general, we might say that, synchronicity shows us the presence of the gods in something, but we don't know which gods. So, there's something meaningful going on there, but we don't know that it's good or ill. I don't consider synchronicities blessings on a relationship. I think that's one of the things people run to too quickly. And you can have synchronicities in a relationship that isn't great or isn't meant to be. That's for sure. So, sometimes we have a synchronicity that's sort of, heralds us falling into a pit that's a kind of our own karma. So, it shows us something's going on, but it doesn't bless us. So, yeah, I mean, I think synchronicities are connected to the heart, but it's not, having a synchronicity doesn't mean the relationship's gonna work out.
It doesn't mean the relationship's going to work out. And I like that. It's which God is it? You really don't know. And the only way you can do it is by if you take the choice, see what you got.
Yeah.
And your phrase, it's not necessarily a blessing, is very, very apt here. So thank you for that. So one of the things that you've mentioned to me before we started was the relationship between synchronicity and the Tao, the Chinese idea of this flow of life of which we're all immersed. So tell us some more about the Tao for those who might not know much about it and its relationship to synchronicity.
Yeah, so the Tao is the Chinese concept, and it's connected to things like, the I Ching a little bit. They're all those are ancient ideas and go way back. And the idea that there's a way that you can flow. Tao means the way, or, in our language, we might say the flow of life. There's a way we can move through life that is right. And that finding that path doesn't come through willpower or, chasing your goals or something like that. It comes through an inner harmony or an inner authenticity or being real, listening to and going with following what's true for you on the inside. So, authentically saying yes if you want to say yes, authentically saying no if you want to say no, but moving through the world in a way that's real and authentic, that puts you into a flow with other things, other people, other objects, that there is a way, and that way feels like it has some harmony to the meaningful purposes of the world, and that through sincerity, authenticity, humility, and just being ourself, reality, being real, we can move with that path. And I think synchronicity is very connected to that, because I don't believe it's something that we make happen at all, that it's connected to the inner state. And if your inner state is just without agenda, you're going to find it easier to have those things fall into your life. And that there's a way you can move through the world that is right, but in a personal way, in a simple way, in a humble way. Um, and that, it's so nice that there's this ancient system of observing that from thousands of years ago in the Chinese culture, that, we get to this modern world and Jung saying, hey, we need this term synchronicity that says, sometimes if I'm moving through the world in that way, something happens that's really special and that seems to be meaningful. Um, and that for me, there's obviously such a real connection there. And what I'm interested in is what's really going on in the world. What is nature all about? And nature has this meaningful principle, and we call it synchronicity, but it's also there in how we put our lives together and in different ways. So yeah, I think there's this principle that's alive in nature that flows with us when we're moving, without agenda and with authenticity and truth to ourselves.
Agreed. And how does synchronicity help each of us get closer into the flow of the Tao and to maintain our our flow with it?
Yeah, well, these little synchronicities that we get in our life, and I feel lucky that it's something that is a part of my life that comes along regularly, and it does feel special whenever it happens. It does feel like you know a wink, from the universe, or some sort of being a part of a process with a bigger uh, partner, you know, um, and that those things, we really can't make them happen. I know there's books out there that try and say that, and I think they're really crazy generally. Um, you know, to have synchronicity happen in our life means, for me, that you're not trying to make it happen, that you're just being real, and these things go on. Um, and when they do, they say, hey, we see you, and we're acknowledging your path to some level. And that's a profound experience. That's a deep experience, even if it's a little one. Even little synchronicities kind of make you feel okay. You're plugged into something. It reminds you a little bit of purpose, reminds you a little bit of that you're not alone. um, and that's something a lot of people are dealing with these days, for sure. And it's a profound experience. And our world is very materialistic, and um, to have this bigger force out there, and to experience it, really sticks with you, and it really uh, makes us feel there's something more to the world, and I think people really need that.
And people really do need that, particularly these days. Now, one of your key ideas among many that you write about, talk about, are archetypes. It's in part of the name of your academy.
Mhm.
The the idea of archetypes preceded Jung, um, but he helped bring it more to the clarity in the Western mind and probably generally speaking around the world, and suggested that through his work with his patients, he saw these patterns repeated, mandala being one of them that he kept seeing. And people would bring these, what became repeated patterns about people. There's a lot of it is about people, the archetypes of different forms in which people can present themselves to the world. And they're very fractal-like in the sense that they are repetitions that are similar but different in the context, but still hold a similarity among them. So that's a beginning of my idea about archetypes. But tell us about, you've studied them a lot, but tell us about what archetypes are and what they mean to you.
Sure. So archetype comes from Greek, and it means first impression. So Plato and Aristotle, all those guys talked about archetypes. And it's the idea that, there's a type to things. So in addition to there being, as Plato and Aristotle talked about, in addition to there being a specific horse and horses, there is a horse type, in addition to being, um, you know, representations of the sun. There's a sun archetype. There's a moon archetype. There's an essence to things, an essential qualities that make them what they are. And for Jung, you know, I say that, you know, the archetypes are the natural architecture of the psyche, that these are the, you know, we understand the mother archetype not only from our experience of mother and from all the mothers in the world and our own mother, but also from generations of humans experiencing that, from being a mother in previous, you know, ancestors, and to all of that experience of the mother that goes back for thousands of generations. And there are these essential types to things, whether it's something like a mother or father or the moon or, you know, warrior energy. Different things have archetypal qualities, and we can understand something as having you know, a meaningful unity across different situations. So, for example, the color black is in its own way. The color black is an archetype. You know, we associate it with things like death. We associate it with a whole bunch of related concepts, and so that the color black has a sort of a meaningful way that we connect it to things. And that, you know, these archetypes are alive within us. I would say most of us are given a sort of a stamp or an impression with certain archetypes are dominant, others are less so. We might find that we're really driven to be, you know, an athlete, or we might find we're really driven to be a scientist, or we might find we're really driven to be a parent. There's certain archetypes that are going to have an affinity for us and that are going to help us find meaning and purpose in the world. And then there's others that are going to be in the shadow for us. There's others that are going to be less fluid and less easy to contact. And we might find that people that have those up front, we project our shadow onto. But for us, you know, we might find, oh, there's certain, you know, I really love, you might say maybe it's baseball, and you know, it's the thing that really gets you going in sports, or whatever it might be, that through expressing that archetype in your life, you know, you find yourself, you find meaning, you find purpose, you find self-expression. And everybody's, you know, got to figure out what those are for themselves. Now, you mentioned before, you know, Jung never said, there's a very popular on the internet, Jung's 12 archetypes. Jung never talked about 12 archetypes. Jung never talked about a number of archetypes. There's, I don't know about, people say there's infinite. I don't think there's infinite. There's a lot of archetypes.
There's a lot of them. There's a lot, and they mix and match too.
Mhm.
And as you talk about that, let me bring up somebody I know pretty well. That's me. And I've had two archetypes that have been going through me from very long time ago. One is athlete, a kind of a warrior, and I did very well with that. And also as a kind of academic nerd, because I like to study stuff and get good grades, and I'm still curious about stuff. And that's what I like about this synchronicity business. It's endlessly curious. So here's two archetypes. You use your words for them, that I've come into this one person and managing the two of them. And I do it by talking about Batman having two identities, or Superman having two identities, another way of playing around with it. So what do you think of this, with this person's me, as dealing with a pair of pretty strong archetypes?
Sure. And I think what you're describing are opposites, are opposite archetypes. And there certainly are. I teach a system that I'm calling archetypal nature. I'm also doing some work calling it archetype and the five Buddha families, where we're looking at different opposing archetypes. So in the system I teach, the warrior and the sage are opposed. And it's very interesting to me because I found out over the years teaching this work, and I've been involved with archetype system that was developed by Tony Wolff, who was very close with Jung. And Tony was on the committee of people that Jung brought together before he wrote the book Personality. Um, um,
Types.
yeah, psychological types. And before he wrote that book, he had Tony Wolff and two others form a committee, and they looked at the various kinds of types of character structures in people. And then that all got rolled into what we now call personality types or psychological types. Later on, Tony came out with her own system and said, hey, those personality types are great, but what about this? And one of the things she was talking about were these archetypes. And so in that system, the warrior and the sage are opposed. And what's very interesting to me is after years of teaching this work to people, people kept telling me about the Buddha families, the 5 Buddha families in the Eastern, Tibetan, and other traditions, Asian. And in their system, they have the warrior and the sage, Vajra and Karma, opposed as well. And so there are sometimes these archetypes that are opposite to each other. You know, the warrior is about going out and doing and, you know, getting what you want through willpower. The sage is about saying, well, hold on a second, I got to reflect here and think about this puzzle and how do I solve it? Different approaches to the world. And if you think about it, you know, the human being on the plains of Africa thousands of years ago, you know, has either got to pick up a spear and go hunt for dinner or figure out a trap or, you know, learn how to grow things. You know, there's really, these are two approaches to how you face the world. There's people that get through the world totally through warrior. But every day they're getting through life just pure willpower, going out there, achieving, you know, being in sales, making those calls, just getting out there and getting on it every day. And then there's people that are doing the sage thing and figuring things out and, you know, going deep and really, you know, letting things brew and, you know, working on it and writing books like you're doing. So to me, these are opposites, but they can be alive in individuals together. And that there can be people that are living from both of those as you're describing. And so, you know, how does that come together in you? Is it a conflict? Is it a, you know, you're describing it as two sides to your personality. You know, that's a very real thing. Is that how you experience it as a conflict or?
I experience them as working together. And the way they got together is I would get the Scholar Athlete Award. I get scholarships to medical school, so I could play rugby. And while I was also going, so they seemed complementary to me. And writing these books takes that kind of aggressiveness because you got to sit down and write it, and you got to get the information, and you got to put it together. But then there is the more sage stepping back and watching the information come through. And so the more I'm able to be in a flow of some kind and trust the environment that is around me to give me what I need to be able to do to write something, becomes almost like it's a dance that I'm able to do with both of them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You've brought them together.
Yeah, it's brought them together, and it's fun trying to be able to see that I probably have done that. Well, well, tell us. I mean, I'm stuck right here. I want to see what more you want to tell us about archetypes.
Yeah, well, so for me in that work, right, you do have these varying types, and so often, you know, they are divided. You know, if somebody's just living from the archetypal sage, they might think the people who are just living from the archetypal warrior are bad, just as a knee-jerk shadow reaction. If somebody's coming from warrior, you know, they might not appreciate the sage necessarily. So there can be the shadow projection of both of those. And there are, you know, like I said, there are people that are really living from one or the other. So it's great that you've got both, you know, expressing through you. And of course, there are other, you know, in the system that I teach from Tony
Well,
Wolff.
just excuse me just a minute, because what you've done here is made me think about how
Yeah,
I was able to put them together
yeah,
early on. Like I won the batting title in high school, my junior year, because I learned how to bunt, and I was fast. So I batted .486, with seven bunts out of 17 hits, and that was using intelligence out there on the baseball field. And in football, I made a conference in high school, and the guy who wrote about me said the smartest runner in the conference. So somehow they were together. It was like that's what I had.
Yeah. Nice. Wow. Yeah. There you go. Definitely brought them together.
So I studied them. So this is what you were calling polarity, and polarities are so important in this reality, and you very well know that when you do archetypes, shadows are opposites of what we got on the surface of it, and so these polarities are what we try to bring together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I think too, it's like accepting that there are different things. Like you got blessed with having both those in a way that you could work with them together. Not everybody does. So, that's why you stood out, right? Because
Yeah.
you could do both those things. So, and I think too, some of the greatest creations that we have is when maybe you get two people together that are opposites, and one's got one set of skills and one's got another, and between the two of them, they're really able to build something powerful. So, I'm about accepting the realities. So I don't bring an agenda. We were talking a bit before we started today about, some people think that, archetypes are evolving. I think that's like almost an oxymoron. And it's for me, the idea that archetypes would be new and today, there's new archetypes. That to me is a misapplication of what the word archetype is. That they're universal, they're timeless. By definition, they're not of today. That's my view, and I think I understand why people want there to be new archetypes for today, and I understand that. And so we mentioned Mary Louise von Franz saying something about that, and I'm a huge fan of hers. But I don't think I think it's too easy for the modern mind to. There's a lot of trying to get what we want. There's a lot of one of my things that I talk about to folks in my archetype workshops is that there's a sort of a consumerist approach that the people that we're used to with personal growth, that if you tell somebody, oh, you're one archetype and not four, they're immediately like they've been cheated. you know so I think we have to be careful about what we're conjuring up and what we're wishing for in our descriptions of the universe. And I'm one that thinks that these archetypes are universal and timeless, which by definition means they don't change, and there isn't really new ones. There's things that look new, but they're as timeless as ever. So that's my take on it. It might be different than some people's, but you know, these energies are around. What defines us in any particular generation is how we relate to them. How do we praise them? How do we get rid of them? And for example, I think, today I think there's a lot of people that are very sort of knee-jerk anti-warrior. Right away, the warrior is bad, warrior's not good. And I think that comes from, in the 90s, there was that real big anti-bullying thing, and kids were brought up to think the bully is the worst thing in the world. And I think part of that, in particularly in American culture, left a residue in certain places. There's very mixed feelings about the warrior. Probably in academia would be a good example. Right? Academia is a very exclusively sage place. In the faculty lounge, you're not going to get a lot of appreciation for the warrior.
Oh man, did I get in trouble for being a little aggressive with psychiatric residents? I, I would just do a kind of New York thing with them, and you couldn't do that. I think that's a very good point. We have pushed the shadow down. Now you got Mark Zuckerberg saying we need more masculine, and that's an overreaction to what they're out there. But I begin to think we got to keep doing that balance between feminine and masculine is another simple way, too simple perhaps, but maybe more archetypal yet about how do we balance those two.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, Yeah, and I think those are, I mean, I don't know this latest thing that you're saying from Zuckerberg, but I think in general there's a healthy instinct to want to course correct. And usually that, I mean, I'm not saying what he did is right or wrong. I don't know the specifics, but there is in us, like the unconscious wants us to kind of go, ooh, we're a little unbalanced this way. Let's go that way. That's homeostasis. That's what, the universe culturally and as individually it wants us to balance out. So we are looking, we go a little over this way now, we want to go that way. And I think one of the, there's different models of humans, and um some people have a view of our character and our human nature that says that there's sort of one type. We're all people are like this, and every time I hear that, I gets me itchy, because I think that reality of all of nature and all of the cosmos and human nature is built on dynamic tensions. So tensions between opposites, so that rather than having one type of, I mean, the idea that there would be one type of person is inherently unbalanced. That reality is we have different kinds of humans, different kinds of people that are what makes society go. And it's the tension between opposing values that produces our common, agreed framework for living together. It's not, oh, we're all like this. There's a tension between principles and archetypes.
As I think about the future of humanity and try to be able to think about how synchronicity can be helpful,
Mhm.
which we've talked a little bit about, I I recognize this tension, this, and I say polarity, and the need to resolve polarities, because you get an idea, a thesis, you get an antithesis to that, and then they become a synthesis that then becomes a new starting place, a new thesis. And that's how this evolves. And a lot of people want a future in which everybody's nice to each other, everybody's harmony, everything's good, and we're doing everything right in harmony with nature. These are all necessary, but boring after a while. Uh, because and not actually true, because you got to have the tension. That's what being human on this planet means, is to have what appears to be conflict, but calling it tension is more neutral
Yes.
and necessary.
Yes. Yeah, and to me, in those utopian fantasies that you're describing, and the folks that are serving those up, to me that there's can often be an edge of regressiveness in that. There's often a sort of like taking away from you the necessity of the hero's journey, taking away from you the necessity of developing a healthy and strong ego. There's conflict that we need to grow, and there can be an energy of a sort of a parental, sort of, oh, we're going to protect you and you don't have to face the challenges of the world and all that. And that's anti-growth, that's anti-health. People need to go out there and get their butt kicked and figure it out and stand up and dust themselves off and try it again. And that's part of how you grow, not from just staying, at home and being safe, with the parent. You have to be, we have to have our ego bruised a little bit, think about our shadow and what else we can bring. And, maybe Mark Zuckerberg, he figured out he needs to bring more warrior energy. God bless him, whatever. We're all getting our butts kicked, right, in different ways. So, how can we learn to listen to that thing? And I think even in do-gooderism, which you're kind of describing, there can be a shadow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the remarkably consistent themes that I've noticed, others certainly, in spiritual groups where everybody's like being highly spiritual, the group bypasses the conflicts that are inevitable when you get a bunch of people together. And for some reason, maybe you can talk about the archetype relationship to this. The conflict is bad, has become a kind of, I mean, archetype or something, a kind of a zeitgeist.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to me, it kind of speaks to what we've already been hinting at a little bit, which is, there are certain types of folks that are just, don't are not comfortable with not only assertiveness but aggression. And aggression is part of life, and aggression is part of what makes the world go round, just like love and everything else. Uh, so there are folks that are uncomfortable, I would say, with the warrior energy in general. And what they're missing is that energy is necessary for life and health and growth.
Yeah, yeah. And what is the archetype these people are demonstrating when
Yeah,
they are? What is that archetype?
yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's two things. It's certainly the sage. Like for me, and we've talked about this already here today, I bet the warrior and the sage are opposed. And so there's a lot of people that are just living in sage, and they don't think it's necessary to have any connection to the warrior at all. Everything's an idea, everything's a concept. What matters is having your ideas all sorted in a really nice order, and have all your principles worked out and your political whatever. And and they don't understand there's a whole other area of reality that they missed, and that's in their shadow. And when they encounter it, they just think, oh, that's bad. Um, and so I think there's the sage piece, which is like, I don't need to do, I can just know, and all that, and have all these sagacious principles. But I also think there's a sort of, as I said, a regressive parent energy there. There's a sort of, oh no, we got to keep everyone happy and safe, and no one ever gets their feelings hurt. Well, like we just said, people need to get their feelings hurt. It's I know people, there's a large groups that don't understand that today, but we need this assertiveness. You need aggression. There's a healthy need for that, and having just the right principles and the right ideas, and the right story you're telling yourself in your head about the world is great, but it's not all there is to life. We have to go out there and do. We have to go out there and you know do the interview, write the book, go and do the thing, like you were saying. To write your books on synchronicity, you have to show up and go and do it, sit down. And that energy, to me, it is a bit of the warrior, like we're talking about.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. Um, what is the archetype that emerges from the combination of sage and warrior?
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, for me, they're so opposite that they need that vehicle of the person to be even brought together, right? So you're bringing them together in yourself. This might be, we have the god Apollo from the Greek history. He's kind of got both those principles going on, so it's not like we don't have examples of it. You might find that, you're bringing those two things together under a third archetype too. It might be like, I bring the warrior and the sage together in service of the community, or in service of love, or there might be these two are brought together for a third different, totally different principle.
Yeah.
uh, but in reality, that's what human, we are all those principles, so we can do that. We can be the spot that happens in. um, yeah, I don't know if there's a single archetype, I would say, born of the two of them, but we do have examples from mythology. Yeah.
Well, it becomes again for me the question of uh, the permanency, the timelessness of archetypes. And yeah, I like talking about the consumers. I want to have all four of them. I'm missing one. Well, in a way, there's something to that, because you want to have them active, at least maybe two of them, so that you can resolve them.
Yeah.
So if there's a resolution, there could be a third one, and for me, the third one is being of service as best as I can. I mean, I mess up. I have my own little selfish things that I like to do, but it's really a lot of fun to try to write about using synchronicity to help the collective human organism. Because I think it can, because it, for one reason, is synchronicity brings in an idea that shows that mind and environment are much more connected than we are being taught.
Mhm.
And then that goes out to interconnectedness, like running into your ex-girlfriend. Something is still holding you together, and it illustrates it at least just for a moment. And
Mhm.
then we're connected to nature and to more than that, Gaia as an earth
Mhm.
consciousness itself. So here we are seeing more synchronicities showing us the interrelationship among and between us. And I also think helping us get to what you were talking about, the flow of the Tao that we're all in, and that requires an authenticity on our part to be able to join with and become part of the Tao. And a beautiful description you had of when you get more authentic, increasingly more than other people will recognize it, and they'll be part, we'll be rowing our boats merrily, merrily down the stream. Life is but a dream together, and who knows where we're going? That's another question.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just so folks know, I'm going to be doing a course on synchronicity on the Jung Academy coming up here in a couple of months with Cynthia Cavalli and getting into that material more deeply. But part of
Why don't you tell the audience how they can get to it for now?
yeah, so just check out Jung Academy on our classes page or our course catalog page. Um, you'll find it there. And
Good.
we do synchronicity stuff pretty regularly on there. So, and one of the things you're saying, you're talking about the field quality of synchronicities is where you started with that question. And to me, I think this is a really important thing, and it's one of the things that I'll get into in the course. Is for me, the psyche is a field, which is why Jung came up in part with the term synchronicity. So, what do I mean by a field? I mean, the psyche is not just your brain. I believe that the psyche is a field that transcends time and space, which is literally what Jung said, and partly what he's talking about with synchronicity. And where does this come from? Well, it comes from Jung, for example, being a therapist working with a client who's sitting in a room and they're across from each other in two chairs. And pretty soon you realize you're picking up stuff that they're feeling and they're picking up stuff that you're feeling. And in psychology, we call that transference and countertransference, that there literally is a field of shared emotion and shared thought between the analyst and the client. And that field can be bigger than just the room, that it can transcend distance. Jung tells a story of one night having a terrible, terrible headache all of a sudden, and he later found out that a client of his had shot himself in the head that night. And things like that. And I really do believe the psyche transcends time and space and is a field. One of the things I talk about in the course, and I want folks to check out and understand, is all of the research that I'm sure you're familiar with of people looking at the extension of consciousness, whether it's Rupert Sheldrake has great books on that, and looking at for example, one of his best books is called The Sense of Being Stared At, where they have an experiment in Holland that they've done thousands of times, where someone's blindfolded and they guess if someone's looking at them from behind, while they're blindfolded, and 55% of people get it right, and that's a statistically off the chart success rate. It should be 50-50. Instead, it's 55. And so there is a way that people's consciousness is not just limited to their physical bodies. People have all kinds of experiences where they're connected to others. The mother who knows when the daughter's in danger on a sailing trip on the other side of the world. That's like an Oprah story. you there's all kinds of examples of this, but the folks that are invested in the materialistic paradigm don't want to ever look at that evidence, and they don't. So I really want people to understand that the psyche is literally a field. When you see the murmuration of starlings moving in those patterns, that is a psychic field That is the only explanation for that movement. Why do I say that? The coordination of that movement by those little bird brains is physically not possible. The same way it's not possible for schools of fish to do all those calculations to move in those groups. It's only possible if it's a psychic field. And I think we're seeing psychic fields every day. We've just learned to kind of go, oh, that's pretty, instead of going, no, that's a whole field moving. And, to me, I also think, we have to face that we don't know what the psyche is. We really don't. We literally don't. That's a word we use, but we don't know what consciousness is. We don't know what the psyche is. I think that there's a way the psyche is connected to ancestors that's mysterious. Whether we have, there's a common experience of, it's a sunny day and you have a little voice in your head that says, oh, bring the umbrella. And the rational mind says, don't need the umbrella. And then off you go. And, 4 hours later, you're getting rained on and you realize there's a part of you that transcends time and space that seems to even be caring for you. That's saying, I've got this headlamp hanging right there. And one time I was traveling to a larger city from where I was, and I had the headlamp out on the table, and I was packing my bag, and the voice said, oh, bring the headlamp. And my rational mind was like, I'm going to a city. I don't need a headlamp. And later that night, I was staying at an Airbnb, and the power went out in the whole neighborhood where I was for a long time. And that headlamp would have been really, really handy. And so what is that voice telling me that? Is that feels like grandmotherly, if you think about it. Like what is that? To me, there's a whisper of ancestor in that. So again, we don't know what these things are, and we're spitballing, right? But there's some bigger questions going on about what the psyche is that the modern mind doesn't want to look at. It's part of the disease, really, of modernity. I mean, I think we're so lost in ourselves, in our technology, in our fantasies about technology, that we've lost a lot, and we've sort of put our belief in ourselves where we used to put God, and that's a very tricky, dangerous time,
Well, I'm delighted to hear your description of field. Telepathy was the name of feeling somebody's pain at a distance originally. And being able to see the future, like with your headlamp, is something that many people report and can do. I have done both of them. I've had that experience. So what you're describing is very consistent with my own experience. I call this field the psychosphere. The collective unconscious is more ambiguous to me, but there's archetypes floating around in the psychosphere as well. And so this is the field through which we communicate with each other through emotionally laden thoughts, as well as thoughts that can be useful, and as well as other emotions. The psychosphere is something we're enveloped in, and that we have an individual one with another person, as you were describing. Therapists will do. You'll have it in the seminars that you run. There'll be a psychosphere that takes a while to get set up, and telepathic communications, emotional connections get established, which can be recognized. I know this from going to dance, that there can be, without words, an emotional connection between me and somebody else. And there's not even looking at each other, but the feeling is there. So the feeling is local, the field is local, it's also non-local.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, very much.
How do archetypes fit in with the field, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that they're definitely a part of it, that they're an attractor. One of our teachers on the Jung Academy described archetypes as having a dynamic load, that there's an energetic tension to them. There's an energetic potential in archetypes. And I think that's very true. There can be field reactions against an archetype. There can be field draws toward an archetype. Um, you know, there's a certain way too. We have to be careful because, like in a big group, right, the lowest common denominator can really pull us. You know,
Oh yeah. Oh
the
yeah.
easiest joke in a big group is the dumbest. You know, because it's, you know, Jung said, like, you know, stupidity is much more widespread than intelligence. I mean, obviously, you know, she didn't say exactly that, but something like that. You know, and it's true because it's more, you know, look at the world. You know, it's out there. It's more base. You know,
And
uh,
I recognize that, Gary, and I have my, maybe it's a polarity or not, but what many people who we might call not intelligent or um, are not self-reflective. They don't have the capacity to examine their own thinking. And so they're stuck in a way of thinking that they learned when they were 6 or 10 or maybe earlier than those. So what I'm trying to be able to manage here in this world is activate through synchronicity self-observation.
yes,
When you do synchronicity, and what happens, you can say, "Oh, that's interesting," and walk away, or you can look at the connection between the two events usually and say, "How does that relate to me? And what does that tell me about the nature of reality?"
yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly synchronicities or strange experiences or, you know, certain kinds of dreams. I'm thinking of almost like, you know, Scrooge. You know, there can be things that come along that make us go, "Whoa, I've got to do some work here," you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and I've got to learn some things that are uncomfortable for me. Um, and I think that's a big part of shadow integration and aging is kind of seeing, okay, wow, you know, the ego is sort of getting, you want ego to be healthy, but as you're aging, you're kind of going, well, that ego, boy, you know, and you're kind of seeing the shadow more regularly. So you're sort of walking around with an awareness of your faults, of your negative track record or
Right, right, right.
life, right? So I think in youth, we're just, oh, you know, we're great and, you know, off we go. But as we get into midlife, you know, the shadow's right there with us. So you're moving through that, and we do have sometimes these experiences of synchronicity that really take us and show us shadow and make us realize, hey, this is. I mean, more often, I think life is doing that, but that's just me. And there certainly are, like you're saying, there are certain people that are less self-reflective, and I mean, there are even people, frankly, I think that are anti self-reflection.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Believe what I tell you. Don't think for yourself.
Yeah, and people who are very uncomfortable with the inner world completely. And so they get
Yeah.
very threatened by people that are more comfortable with it.
That's good. That's good. I think it's true. Well, we're coming to the end of our delightful conversation, Gary. I wonder what you would like to leave our audience with.
Well, you know, there are bigger realities that this show is all about sharing with people, and I think that's wonderful. And I think, you know,
Thank you.
whether you're watching Bernard more or you want to come see the Academy and Young Academy and come explore some courses, you know, we're have a shared mission in that we're saying that there's more going on to life. It's deeper. It might not be easy. It might not be totally what your ego wants to experience, but there are bigger and deeper sources you can plug into. And Bernard and myself are in the business of trying to plug you in with opportunities to be aware of that. So I hope you'll continue to follow him and come check us out and join in communities of people that want to, you know, feel connected to a deeper reality. So.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gary.